Board of Education meeting. We'll start with a roll call for Ms. Haas.
Mrs. Bukta?
Here.
Mr. Rogers?
Here.
Mrs. Selly?
Here.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Here.
Mr. Nickram?
Here. And with that, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. And as customary for the start of every board meeting, we read our vision and mission statement. Our vision statement simply reads, achieving distinction in all that we do, while the mission statement reads, cultivate an inclusive, high-performing culture of growth and community. Moving on to the second item on the agenda this evening is comments from the audience. Do we have any that were submitted?
We do not.
We do not. All right, we'll move on to the consent agenda this evening.
Yes, as we know, Robert's rules provide for a consent agenda listing several items for approval of the board in a single motion. Documentation concerning these items have been provided to all board members in advance to assure an extensive and thorough review and will then become part of the permanent record. Items may be removed from the consent agenda at the request of any board member. This evening, we have items A, minutes of the November 16, 2023 regular meeting. Item B, personnel. This evening includes the appointment of Alyssa Burklow, 1.0 FTE, fifth grade teacher at Berry Elementary School, effective January 22, 2024. Item C, the school safety drill reports. Item D, the emergency operations plan. Item E, Start College Now program request correction. Item F, course proposals for the 2024-25 school year. Item G, the academic and career plan for the 2023-24 school year. Item H, Wisconsin OPEB Trust Annual Review and Report. Item I, gifts to the school district this evening, including a donation from Andrew Salamone of 97 large floating bamboo triangle shelves with an estimated value of $1,940 for the high school technical education program. And also a donation from Chrissy Allard of a 2010 GMC Acadia SL2 vehicle with an estimated value of $6,000 for the high school automotive program, and also a donation from an anonymous donor of Rochester Concrete Products, Marzano 6-centimeter pavers with an estimated value of $1,800 for the high school art department courtyard beautification project. Item J, of which there are no budget transfers this evening, and then item K, payment of district bills and the treasurer's report.
All right, thank you for that. And there's any discussion on items A through K this evening?
I would like to pull out item C,
Okay.
and only because I want to make some comments about it. I think that school safety is a really important thing for us to, acknowledge. With the referendum that passed last year, we were able to do safe, secure entrances at all the buildings, and I know this gives a lot of probably staff, parents, and kids anxiety as they hear that there are these drills, but I think it's really important that we are so proactive about the safety, and I just want to acknowledge the staff and the students for reading through the reports, just they're, taking this seriously, and how important it is to do these drills.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to do, and I have to pull it out in order to make comments, right? So.
Yes, that is true.
I move passage of the consent agenda as presented, with the exception of C.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. Rogers, a second by Ms. Reynolds, and Ms. Haas, roll call.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mrs. Bukta?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mrs. Selly?
Yes.
Mr. Nickram?
Yes. And then we'll move to item C with the, on the consent agenda for the school
Yep.
safety.
Be it resolved that the Board of Education accept the school safety reports as conducted in district buildings.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Ms. Selly, seconded by Ms. Bukta, and that can just be,
His phone.
all right, all those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? All right, thank you for that. All right, moving on to the instruction for high school course proposal.
Yes, we are pleased that the board just did the acceptance of the second reading of last month's course proposals, which included a number of dual credit options that are all new for our high school students. We're very excited about. We're also very pleased this evening to present to you for a first read that of a fabrications course, which is also a dual credit course benefiting our technical education department. So we would ask that you consider that as a first read, then to potentially receive a second read in January.
This is obviously pretty customary. We've done this a number of times here. So do we have any further discussion on the fabrications dual credit course?
Just great to see the proactive
Yeah.
approach from, all the staff of getting these dual credits. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's been a pretty consistent approach, and that's greatly
Yeah.
appreciated.
And in so many different areas, too.
Absolutely, really
That's
an
huge.
enhancement to many different programs at the high school. Great opportunities, and then many kids taking advantage of that as well.
Well,
Yeah.
with the cost of college, this is the way to go.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Yep.
And in the
That's good.
career and technical development report, I mean, it's just seeing how many kids are benefiting from this. I think it's fantastic.
Could you just elaborate a little, just as we know that it starts January, I think we were starting to have course selections for those coming new, either transfers or freshmen, to kind of elaborate on exactly what dual credit means for them?
Sure, so dual credit is an opportunity to take a course in high school, which is a similar, if not the same, curriculum as provided at one of our two-year technical or community colleges. It affords students then to not only get high school credit, but also have those credits applied to a two-year program of their choice moving forward. With the benefit of the high school and their director of instruction and her office getting these to you now, it means that students will be able to sign up for these courses moving into next year already as well. So including this course, with your second read, this would be available to them in the fall as well.
Awesome, thank you.
And it's different than AP, where you have to take an exam at the end in order to get the
Yes.
credit.
Yep, that's correct.
By the way, I understand that it's dual credits. Does it affect the grade point average in the community college setting?
I believe it would be a transcripted credit, therefore it would not reflect in the
Okay.
overall GPA. You do need to have a certain level of proficiency in the course to receive the credit. To get those credits, you need to have above average performance at the high school level course.
All right. Be it resolved that the following new high school course proposal for the 2024-25 school year be placed on the table and considered for approval at the January board meeting, fabrications dual credit.
I'll second.
Motion by Ms. Sully, a second by Ms. Reynolds, and all those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? All right. Good. Moving on to Section 5 of non-instruction, January board meeting change date.
Yes, since we last met, our proposal was approved. We have a group presenting at the State School Board Association Conference in Milwaukee. We were lucky enough to get the 8 a.m. time slot on Wednesday. So we would appreciate much if we could have that meeting, which will be, of course, an important meeting for us and our community, moving that to the Monday. I'll look at the date here.
January 15th.
Which would be January 15th. Thank you.
Be it
Any-
resolved that the January board meeting be conducted on Monday, January 15th, 2024, starting at 5:30.
Second.
All right, a motion by Ms. Reynolds, a second by Mr. Rogers. All those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? Right. Moving on to date to conduct superintendent evaluation. 1 second here. All right, so this is, see if everybody's available for February 15th. I'm hoping that you are available.
Yes.
Okay. good. And
Make yourself
and if not,
available.
you will be making yourself available, I assume there, right? So is everybody available on Thursday, the February 15th for a meeting?
And that is the night of the board meeting.
That is night, so everybody better be available, right?
I'll be here.
I connect the dots there, thank you, Ms. Haas.
Be resolved that the annual superintendent evaluation be held on Thursday, February 15th, 2024. I so move.
Second.
All right, a motion by Ms. Rogers, a second by Ms. Sully. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And those opposed? Okay. Moving on to the 24-25, that's crazy to say, school calendar.
It is, and this has been in the works for some time. This evening, we do not have an elaborate presentation for you because next year's school calendar looks eerily similar to this year's school calendar. Given state requirements and other obligations that are required through statute, there are fairly significant limits as to when schools can begin school, how many days and minutes of instruction, and those types of things. So essentially, next year's school calendar, which is available in the packet, but then will be on the website this evening, and then we'll be sharing with families after the new year for their planning, is essentially identical to this calendar with corresponding dates. However, we are going to begin with students this year on Wednesday, September 4th. So that would be one day later than we typically do. Without getting into elaborate detail, the reason for that is given that we have 4 very significant construction projects going on at each of our elementary schools throughout the entirety of the summer. This is providing us a little bit of cushion should we need a couple of extra days to get teachers into classrooms and to be able to get things set up and ready for students to join us. So the only difference, again, from this calendar to that of this year is students will begin one day later than the corresponding date this year, so that would be September 4th, and then we will end school rather late next year, but on Wednesday, June 11th.
And as I reflect back, I don't think there's been a whole lot of variation. Obviously, this year's a little bit different, but given what we have going on, that seems logical that we move, kind of bump that up to that Wednesday. And,
Gives us a little bit of wiggle room, and we're also trying to be very conscious of providing time for staff to get into classrooms and get things set up for students as well. So that extra day, I think, could be very beneficial to
Okay.
all involved.
Start off on the right foot.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and we were able to start a little earlier because we had it approved by the
Yes,
state
so-
because of the construction,
Yeah,
so it has to be a
and
special.
we've gotten a lot of, well, I should say, we've gotten a fair amount of positive feedback about the earlier start this year. I think there was a bit of a lobby to continue that practice, which I'm guessing there's a contingent on the other side as well. But just again, for clarity, we are required by state statute not to begin with students until the Tuesday after Labor Day. So that really sort of ties us up a bit as to how we can work that calendar accordingly. So unless you have a very specific reason, and then you still need to have that approved by the DPI. For us last year, that was building construction, which was easily approved. But they also made it clear to us that they're taking a much firmer line on districts that have been a little creative maybe in some of their reasons for that earlier start. So we will again be regarding statute starting after Labor Day this year.
Okay.
Oh, be it resolved that the Board of Education approve the 2024-2025 school calendar.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. Reynolds, a second by Ms. Bookta, and all those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? All right.
And again, we will be sharing that with families very shortly, but we wanted to get that done in December so that families could start planning their plans for next summer and beyond as well, so.
But it's available in the,
It'll be available online immediately, yes.
Good. We're moving on to item D of section 5 here, strategic plan update.
Yeah, so this evening we have Nathan Knitt, our Director of Business Services, who, as requested, will provide a brief 5-year financial projection to the board and the community, as well as provide some updated information regarding a potential operational referendum to be considered in the upcoming election cycle. So with that, Mr. Knitt.
Thank you, Dr. Abbott. Tonight, we'll be going over, as mentioned, the 5-year budget projection looking forward. To guide us along the way, we're going to first discuss how did we get to where we are today. We'll briefly discuss our enrollment projections. Then we'll look at the financial projections, as those are a direct factor of enrollment. And then we will close up with some referendum thoughts. So again, first, how did we get here? Looking at how the budget strategy has been evaluated over time, we have a few notes and comments here. that the goal of the district is to provide a competitive compensation and benefits package for this year and in all future years. We continue to evaluate our enrollment numbers and compare them to staffing levels to make sure that we are right-sized. So again, that has been done previously and is being looked at in the future. We look at all vacancies to find the best way to use our human resources and find where we can plug holes and be able to have those appropriate staffing levels. And then we have also looked at a potential operational referendum and what that would look like. And then this is the last year of the federal ESSER funds. So as a quick reminder that those were stimulus packages passed during the COVID pandemic, providing schools with one-time funds. The last of those funds will be used by June 30th of this year. So in all future years, we will no longer be talking about ESSER. Looking at how the district has been implementing those strategies, these two strategies here of right-sizing our staff to enrollment and providing compensation and competitive compensation and benefits packages, financially speaking, are one and the same in that in the last year we did right-size staff to match our declining enrollment. So you see that in the salary piece, that salaries year over year declined by about 6.1%. You see on the second line, the benefits actually increased by 2.4%. This is because of very intentional decisions the district made that we kept our benefits package whole. We did not pass the cost of increased health insurance and other insurances on to staff. We maintained the level that the district contributes to the health savings accounts. We did not skimp on those areas. And so that's why we see salaries decreasing, because we did right-size staff. But also built within that negative 6.1% is a 4% increase for staff. That the board did increase salaries for all staff by 4%. So that is also built into that. So again, the salaries are going down, benefits going up, showing that we do want to remain competitive, but that we are looking to make sure we are properly aligned.
And that's the overall salary total in our budget because of less staff, not that individual salaries are going down.
Correct. Yep. Individual salaries are up for staff that were here last year compared to this year by 4%, but the pool as a whole. Thank you for clarifying. So now we're going to look at our enrollment projection. This is not going to be a deep dive into enrollment, but just highlighting where we were and where we project to be heading. So looking at a K-12 head count, with our budget projection, we're looking 5 years forward to make things balanced. We're also looking at 5 years in the past of where we were for enrollment. So 5 years back, 5 years forward. So we do see that enrollment is trending downwards. This is not unique to Fort Atkinson. This is an issue at least 75% of the districts throughout the state of Wisconsin, that populations are becoming more concentrated in more urban areas, and Wisconsin is a largely rural state. So a lot of districts are seeing trends similar to this, if not worse. So currently, our third Friday head count in 23-24 was 2,248 kids. Again, this is kindergarten through 12, so this does not count 4K kids at all. So we see that we're about 2,250, and we're seeing that slowly decline and start to level off in future years. Another key piece to remember with this is a projection using a survival analysis. And the further we get out, we're starting to talk about kids that haven't even been born yet. So this time next year, those numbers will change. That these are not written in stone permanently, but these are our best guess at where we think things will be in the future so that we can continue to forecast our financial situation. Speaking of financial situation, as we've discussed before, that the money in public education follows the kid, so that we had to talk about enrollment before we could talk financials. So a few pieces to note here. Built into our financial model, we do have a number of assumptions. The first being the $325 per member increase under the revenue limit. We do know this is in effect for next year, that the biennial budget that was just passed included 2 years guaranteed of increases in $325 per member. As it stands right now, that number is projected in future years, but with every biennial budget, that is subject to change. As mentioned previously, the federal COVID dollars are no longer in future budgets. For salary, or for wage increases for next year, we projected a 4.15% salary increase for, again, the 24-25 school year, and then 3% each year after. That we have 1 month left of inflation data to come out from the federal government, that the CPI for school districts is determined through the average inflation of the calendar year. So we have 11 of the 12 months of data. Unless something dramatically changes, we're pretty close to that 4.15. So I wanted to show the board what that would look like if we went up to CPI. The other assumption built in that's a major highlight is a 15% increase in health insurance costs. That discussing with our human resources team, talking to other districts, talking to private sector companies, seeing like what trends should we be expecting, we are expecting to see higher increases to our health insurance costs. So right now we budgeted a 15%. In the past, Jason would use about a 10%, but we're just seeing some adverse development across the industry. And then there are a couple other increases highlighted below, 5% increase in utilities and transportation, 10% in other insurances, so that's your liability, auto insurance, property, etc. A 3% increase in 4K payments, because that's the percent of increase that we're seeing under the revenue limit. So as our revenue limit goes up per kid, the payments to the 4K sites go up by the same percentage. And then a couple other miscellaneous budget line increases. So taking all these assumptions today and then bringing them into our financial model, this is our base projection. So we have last year's final number, the 22-23, that we ran slightly in the black, which is encouraging. And we have our budget number for the 23-24 school year, which we knew we were going to be running a deficit budget. The future years are forecasted with the assumptions from the previous slide and nothing else built in. So right now, our projected deficit for the 24-25 school year is just over $5 million. And you see that increase by just over $2 million each year after that. So this highlights that unless something changes from the base, we are going to have deficits that we're facing, and fund balance would only be able to cover us until early on into the 25-26 school year. To highlight why the previous slide looks as bleak as it does, the historical increases from the state have not matched our ongoing expenses. That folks will say, yes, this is the highest increase per member under the revenue limit for the 23-24 and 24-25 school year at $325 per kid. Again, they're not wrong looking at the last 10, 20 years, that is the highest nominal amount. But as a percentage, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what we need. Then looking ahead to the strategies that the board has used in the past, just reiterating and reaffirming that we want to continue to provide competitive compensation and benefits for all of our staff. We want to make sure that we are in line student to staff ratio wise, and we want to be strategic on how we address vacancies. That there are always opportunities as staff pursue other opportunities and as the district continues to work towards its strategic goals, that we can find the right outcome in addressing vacancies. And then the last piece is we want to make sure that we are getting the best return on investment for programs and for staff members. So,
Before we go into that, can I ask just a
Yes.
clarification? So when you go back to the graph, all those percent increases that you're projecting, those are compounding. So when you say 15% increase, that's 15% for next year, and then on top of that total, another 15%, because our expenses keep going up, compounding over the years.
correct.
Okay.
Yep, for all the assumptions, they were built in for the 24-25, and the same percentages were used each year after that.
And then it was just assumed that the 325, because that's all we know now,
Yep,
for this year and next year, and then you just kept that in as far as our income, if you will.
yep. I did keep the 325 in for each of the 5 years that technically it is in law right now through the governor's veto power that we have the 325 per member for the next 400 years. Again, things can change, but as things stand today, that 325 was built in for each of the years you see in the graph.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to interrupt you. I
No,
just
no,
wanted to
no.
clarify that.
No, I appreciate clarifying that. Yes, we are seeing these costs compound and it's accelerating. So given the base scenario and the assumptions built into it, we are going to be talking a little bit more about referendum now. And I also do want to clarify these are thoughts, that these are not final decisions that are being made tonight. So the first question is, why referendum? The Wisconsin Association of School Business Officials has put out this very informative video. I will warn you, it is about 22-ish minutes long, but it is worth it. It talks about some of the pieces I've highlighted, but goes into greater detail. Also, for the folks that are watching online, you can enter the bit.ly address and you'll be able to pull up the video as well. And then one last note before we start with the video. This was produced before the biennial budget was passed, so there aren't comments about the 325 per member, but it does not detract from the overall message from the video. And talking to the folks at WASBO, they are going to be working on updates that they will be presenting at the school board convention next month.
Wisconsin Public Schools educate over 820,000 students in 421 school districts and over 2,300 schools across the state. During the current 21-23 state budget, K-12 school aids make up 1/3 of the state's general fund. A lot of that aid is designed to hold down property taxes so that the full cost of K-12 education doesn't fall on local communities, but is shared by the state. We are primarily a small school district state. More than half of school districts have fewer than 1,000 students, and over 3/4 have fewer than 2,000 students. The median district size is 887. And these are critically important centers of community life. And how are our kids doing in school? Wisconsin's high school graduation rate is over 90%, and the state ranks 3rd in the nation on 8th grade math proficiency. But when you look at 4th grade reading proficiency, Wisconsin's rank drops to 20th nationally. And Wisconsin has the widest black-white student achievement gap on both measures of any state in the nation. So we have a lot to build on, but we also have a lot of work to do.
To build on its strengths and make meaningful progress on its challenges, Wisconsin's K-12 public education system depends most heavily on state and local resources. So what is the state's role in funding local schools? And how is that linked to the major financial challenges school districts face? The answer to both questions begins with the revenue limit. Once upon a time, the state decided how much aid to allocate for schools, but local school boards decided how much they wanted to add to that amount through local property taxes. Not so anymore. In 1993-94, the state put a cap on the amount of money per pupil that a school district could spend in state general school aids and local property taxes combined. The vast majority of a school district budget comes from the revenue limit. It drives what a school district can and cannot provide for its students. What is the revenue limit per pupil for Wisconsin, you may ask? It is different for every district. That is because a district's revenue limit today is based on what it was spending in 1993 when revenue limits were established. It drew a line in the sand that is now frozen in time. Frugal districts were essentially locked in to low spending levels, and any disparities between districts at that time is now baked into the school funding landscape today, as this map illustrates. In the map, districts are coded from red to green, with red being the lowest spending districts and green being the highest. As you can see, the vast majority of districts are orange and red. These are the districts on the lowest end of the spending range, and they tend to be small and rural, whereas the green, blue, and yellow districts tend to be located in a few of the population centers around the state. Notice how many cases where you can see a low spending district surrounded by higher spending districts. In some cases, they are receiving thousands of dollars less per pupil than their neighbors, and that number is going down because their enrollment is likely declining. More on that in a moment. Imagine how this affects their ability to compete to fill teacher shortages or provide high-quality programming. In 2022-23, the lowest spending district received just over $10,000 per pupil, while the highest spending district receives more than double that amount, just over $26,000. The average falls much closer to the minimum at $11,888 per pupil. In essence, the relative amount that a student's district was spending per pupil in 1993 determines how much they can spend today. In other words, the spending floor for education in Wisconsin is not based on student need, the cost of educating their particular students, or a minimum amount of educational services, but rather an arbitrary amount that was determined 30 years ago. So what recourse have districts had to cope with the disparities and low spending caps that persist because of revenue limits? Many districts have taken advantage of one of the only forms of recourse available to them. They have asked their voters to override their limit and raise property taxes through an operating referendum. Since 2013, the year after revenue limits were drastically cut as part of Act 10, 259 districts have exercised that option to go to operating referendum to try to remedy their situation. Although the vast majority of those ballot measures passed, over the past 5 years, more than half of all Wisconsin school districts have either failed or not gone to referendum at all. In effect, referendums have widened the disparities between districts that revenue limits put in place in 1993. We'll talk more about referendums in a moment. Another key impact of revenue limits has to do with inflation. When the limits were first adopted in the early 90s, they increased every year at the rate of inflation. But that stopped in 2009-10 when the legislature removed those automatic adjustments during the Great Recession. But inflationary indexing was never put back in place, even if you take into account a new per pupil aid on top of revenue limits that started in 2012-13. In the chart, the blue line represents the actual combined adjustment in the revenue limit and per pupil aids from year to year since 2008-9. In 2012, school districts actually saw an average cut of $554 per pupil as part of Act 10. And in 6 of the last 8 years, there has been no adjustment in the revenue limit at all, including the last 2 years when there was also a zero increase in per pupil aid, meaning school district general funding has been essentially frozen for the last 2 years. Just as they are working to recover from the pandemic and at a time when inflation is at a 40-year high. The gray line shows where annual adjustments in per pupil funding would have been had they been allowed to increase at the rate of inflation as they were designed to do. So despite some media accounts of more and more money pouring into Wisconsin schools, the facts are that buying power of education funding has been falling behind inflation since 2009. To be specific, school districts have lost over $3,200 per pupil since inflationary indexing was stopped. If you count just from 2012-13, after the Act 10 cuts, that amount is still more than $2,200 per pupil. For a district with just 1,000 students, for example, that's $2.2 million in general operating resources. Understanding how state aid and local property taxes are capped by the revenue limit is essential to understand, because it means the state can claim to invest millions in education while providing no more resources for schools. As long as the revenue limit rises less than the rate of inflation and less than the amount of state aids, as it has since 2008-9, school districts will have fewer resources, not more, just to maintain the current level of educational service. The investment in school aids acts, in fact, as property tax relief, not money for schools. Over time, school districts have coped by finding savings wherever they could, and that included using the one-time savings allowed under Act 10, keeping staff pay below inflation, and many other strategies. But again, when there are no more savings to be had, districts have turned more and more to their communities, asking them to raise taxes on themselves to support their schools through operating referendums. But as we've discussed, many of the remaining districts have found it difficult to do that. A related challenge has to do with the way school districts often describe the current state of K-12 education in Wisconsin as at the edge of a fiscal cliff. As we just noted, the 21-23 state budget did not provide any increase in general school district revenues at all. Instead, the legislature supplanted what they would have allowed in revenue limit and allocated in state aids by redirecting $2.4 billion in federal aid that was intended to help school districts, known as ESSER, to cope with one-time pandemic-related needs. Put another way, school districts were left to find a way to cut costs for 2 years at a time when inflation was at a 40-year high and in the midst of a global pandemic that was causing unprecedented learning loss, or use at least some of the one-time pandemic aid to maintain regular, ongoing school district operations. Wisconsin was one of the only states in the nation to take this tack, and it created a 2-year structural hole in state and school district budgets. One reason for this is that when revenue limits were frozen in the 21-23 budget, the inflationary spike we've seen was not built into school district budget projections. And also, pandemic aid has had disparate impacts across the state. ESSER was distributed based on a student poverty formula, so although all districts felt pandemic impacts and costs, not all got enough federal relief to cover their costs. The federal COVID aid will expire in September of 2024. Many school districts have already hit the edge of the cliff, having spent or committed all of their ESSER monies and are projecting deficits. Others are waiting on decisions about how to spend it, in the case they need it to help cushion costs should the 23-25 state budget underfund K-12 public schools in Wisconsin again. Here's a look at one consequence of the way K-12 funding has taken shape in Wisconsin over the past couple decades. Wisconsin's national rank in per pupil spending on K-12 education has dropped from 11th in the nation in 2002, when it was spending 11% above the national average, to 25th in 2020, when it was spending 5.6% below the national average, the largest drop of any state in that period. And that was before the freeze in general revenue over the 22 and 23 school years. Because of that freeze, we'd expect to see that ranking to fall even further when the new census data come out later this year. In this environment, it makes little sense to talk about a return on investment in schools. Rather, the state's fall in national rankings suggests the return we are seeing on over a decade of disinvestment. Given the importance of K-12 education as the foundation for the state's workforce, economy, and civic life, when we see this kind of trend, it may be time to think seriously about how far Wisconsin is willing to fall relative to the rest of the country. So what is the trade-off for using state school aids to hold down revenue limits? you end up keeping the overall tax burden low. As K-12 spending has lost ground, we have seen a historic decrease in the state and local tax burden. In fact, in 2022, Wisconsin's state and local taxes as a percent of income fell to its lowest level on record. And contrary to statements by some state leaders, Wisconsin's tax burden also compares favorably in the region and is in the bottom half of states nationwide. In this map, the bluer the state, the lower the tax burden. The grayer the state, the higher the tax burden. You can see here that Wisconsin's state and local tax burden is the lowest of any neighboring state except Michigan, whose tax burden is very close to Wisconsin's. These trends challenge us to ask, at what point do we see diminishing returns in educational quality? At what level of tax savings do we start to curtail our students' chances of career success or lose our best and brightest to other states that are willing to invest in the future of their teachers, children, workforce, and economy? What is the right balance between investment in education and tax relief? Inflation isn't the only thing squeezing school district budgets. We'll discuss 3 more major factors that are key to understanding the state of K-12 education finance in Wisconsin: special education, declining enrollment, and educator shortages. School districts must now absorb the rising cost of student needs, especially those related to the pandemic. A big factor here is the rise in special education costs. Although school districts are mandated by both state and federal law to meet the needs of students with disabilities, funding for those mandates has not come close to covering costs in over 20 years. The dark blue bars in this chart, measured on the left axis, show the amount of aid the state has appropriated to reimburse school districts for special education costs since the 2001 school year. The right axis and the light blue line show how that aid translates to the rate of reimbursement for special education costs. Starting in 2008-09, right around the same time that revenue limits were tightening, the state kept special education funding flat for more than a decade, while special education costs were going up, resulting in a downward trend in reimbursement levels. With some modest funding increases in recent years, reimbursement has risen slightly, but still covers less than a third of what it costs to serve the needs of students with disabilities. This forces school districts to pull from already strained local budgets that are there to support all students, including students with disabilities, depleting resources for staffing, pandemic recovery programs, reading supports, career and technical education, technology investments, building maintenance, and so on. Across the state, school districts transfer more than $1 billion every year to cover that funding gap. That's why we're hearing a consistent refrain from both the governor and school districts across the state, asking for both general spendable resources and a significant boost in the special education reimbursement rate. Together, those 2 funding sources would not only strengthen the support schools can provide for special education, but preserve critical resources for all students. Declining enrollment is another major challenge for school districts. This map shows a time progression, where districts grow darker as enrollment declines and lighter as enrollment increases. Starting with 2005-06, watch how many school districts grow darker, meaning they're experiencing enrollment loss. As the map shows, enrollment has been falling in the majority of Wisconsin school districts, the vast majority of which are small and rural. In fact, more than half of Wisconsin students attend districts with fewer than 1,000 students. At the same time, enrollment is on the rise in a small number of population centers, as you can see in the number of yellow and light green regions appearing. By 2021-22, 3/4 of Wisconsin students are located in less than a third of the state's school districts. You might have noticed how this map bears a striking resemblance to the revenue limit map we saw earlier. The small rural districts experiencing the deepest enrollment declines are also the ones already at a financial disadvantage in being at the bottom of the revenue limit scale. These patterns follow steady demographic trends such as an aging population, a decline in the birth rate since 2007, and a resulting decline in the share of school-age children since at least 1990. The problem is that under a per-pupil funding model like we have in Wisconsin, school districts don't shrink well, especially small ones. That's because costs don't fall in step with enrollment declines. Fixed costs, like facilities, fuel, energy, and curriculum, don't go down just because a district has fewer students. And because enrollment declines usually are spread across multiple classrooms, grades, and schools, districts can't easily cut the high-cost expenses such as teachers, staff, or the number of classrooms without compromising instruction or class size. Declining enrollment is not a partisan issue. It is just a demographic reality that has immediate impacts on school district finances and their ability to serve their students in the context of historic inflation and several years of frozen revenue limits. But it's also a challenge that asks us to consider long-term structural solutions, as we'll be dealing with it for a long time to come. Rounding out our discussion of the key budget challenges public schools face is educator and staff shortages. In an August 2022 DPI survey, 91% of school districts said they face challenges attracting enough staff to operate the district for the 22-23 school year. 70% said that included classroom teachers, but well over half also cited classroom support and building operations staff, with pupil services staff being a challenge for well over a third of districts. In terms of the subject areas, special education tops the list, with half of all school districts saying they don't have enough educators. But over a quarter of school districts also cited math, reading, and career and tech ed. And teachers to help English learners is a significant challenge in many districts as well. And it's not just about the staffing pipeline into districts. Retention is also a huge challenge. Recent DPI data show that by the 5th year of teaching, 1/3 of teachers who started their careers in Wisconsin have left the state, and over half have left the district where they started. And with each staffing loss, districts lose all of the time and resources they spent on hiring, training, and professional development on those staff members. Enrollment, inflation, and the disparities built into the revenue limit all come into play here too. School districts are trying to keep up with ordinary expenses while also competing with each other as well as the private sector to retain and fill vacancies for critical instructional and support staff. With over a decade of funding levels pushed down below inflation for all districts, this becomes a losing game. But it's especially challenging for small rural districts and those that got locked into low spending levels in 1993. If nearby districts have higher revenue limits, attracting and retaining the staff they need to serve their students becomes a matter of stark inequity. And this brings us back to operating referendums. As we've been discussing, one of the only tools school districts have to cope with the pressure of these costs is to go to their local taxpayers to ask them to pass an operating referendum. In his 1993 budget address, Tommy Thompson laid out his vision for the revenue limit, saying, "I want to freeze the property tax rate at December 1992 levels. If local governments wish to spend more, they'll have to ask the taxpayers. My guess is the answer will be no." Fast forward 3 decades later, after years of compounded underfunding, and we are seeing rising trends in the number, amount, and passage rates, as shown by the green line, of local referendums to raise the caps on school revenue limits. The chart clearly illustrates how the rise in operating referendums, the red bars, coincides with the state pulling way back on revenue limit authority, first by decoupling annual increases from inflation in 2010, and then by allowing no increases or very small increases in many recent years. In the absence of state support, these are communities electing in many cases to tax themselves in order to support their schools. Increasingly, districts aren't trying to boost resources for new initiatives, but just to continue current operations, maintain staffing levels, retain critical academic recovery positions that will be needed long after COVID relief monies have run out, and to keep compensation competitive with the private sector to retain staff. The year 2022 marked the highest number of operating referendums since at least 2000. But as we've discussed, school districts' ability to access this coping strategy has been uneven and arguably inequitable. Between 2002 and 2022, 112 school districts have not held a single referendum, and another 87 have held only one. But there may be a limit to how long these trends can continue. The passage rates of non-recurring referendums in April 2023, for instance, were lower than they have been in over a decade. It's just one point in time, and factors affecting referendum passage are hyperlocal. But K-12 education observers are still concerned about what it could mean for the future of public schools in Wisconsin. Clearly, districts are signaling they need more school resources to survive, much less thrive. But school referendums can be extremely divisive to a community. They're fraught with risk and uncertainty, and they divert substantial time and resources away from educational instruction and leadership. It may be time for state policymakers to seriously consider adopting a more systematic and equitable approach to meeting the needs of Wisconsin's future workers, parents, and leaders.
So again, that was a lengthy presentation, but I do believe that it covered quite a bit in that time frame. So again, it begs the question, why referendum, and what does that mean for Fort Atkinson? So the chart here shows what our budget situation would look like if we went to a $6.5 million referendum that would be non-recurring over a 3-year period. So we see the red line is the base projection from a couple slides back, but now we have an orange line above that only has those 3 points. That with successful passage, we'd have an additional $6.5 million each year for the 24-25 school year and the subsequent 2 years after that. One thing to note with this is even with a successful passage of a referendum for that amount and for that length, the district would still be looking at a cumulative deficit of $1.8 million. But that, for us, reflects that we need to continue using the strategies we've looked at before, especially when it comes to right sizing. We saw that enrollment trends are going down, so we need to continue to evaluate our right sizing strategies. So again, these are with current assumptions, current projections, but understanding that the referendum is not going to bring back what had been reduced previously, and we still have some work to do even with the successful passage of the referendum. To highlight as well, this is preliminary language for what a ballot question would look like. I want to highlight that on the ballot there is a section above the question you see here that discusses the revenue limits, permissions to exceed. So this is not carbon copy what you would see on the ballot. This would be the bottom half of it. But a lot of the feedback that we received from from the referendum from last year is that we needed to make the language clearer, to tighten things up in terms of what the ask was. So this has been, we've worked with our bond counsel to make sure we have everything to make the question legally compliant, but hearing that feedback of, let's be very straightforward. So we see, again, there's, starting with the 24-25 school year, the amount not to exceed $6.5 million for each of the next 3 years, ending with the 26-27 school year. Other districts craft questions differently. There's no right way, there's no wrong way, but hearing the feedback of, we want to know what we're voting for, we want it to be as clear and concise as possible. This is the route that we've taken.
But we can't just say, can we get another 6.5 million over 3 years? Like, we can't simplify it any more than this, is that right?
Correct,
By state statute?
Yep, and again, to be legally not questionable. So some districts are saying like, oh, can we put a higher number? We won't go up to that number. Can we say, you know, we'll ask for 10, but we might, you know, go at 7, making numbers up. That has been questioned in courts before. So we want to be crystal clear that we're asking for $6.5 million a year for the next 3 years. But again, there is no way we can get this more concise than what you see before you.
Yeah. It's asking the voters to read a legal clause
Yep.
and to try to understand it.
Yep. And our efforts over the next couple of months will be to help folks understand what they're voting for at the ballot, or on election day, and what the ballot will look like. Some thoughts to support, you know, where did the $6.5 million come from? Where did the 3 years come from? You know, not recurring, non-recurring, what does this all mean? Again, a lot of this is feedback from the last election. That in the past, what the school district has gone with is a blended question of, we're gonna ask for some in recurring dollars, and we're gonna ask for some in non-recurring. So what that would look like for recurring referendum, or recurring operating referendums, the orange line would be extended indefinitely. And we've passed some blended questions in the past, and that has been built in for all the projections you see here, but there's been that added element of the non-recurring. This time around, we're saying, okay, you know, balancing between recurring and non-recurring, there are pros and cons to both approaches, but we want to go with the non-recurring because it instills that local control for the community, that, again, we're asking them in 3 years from now, that referendum would be off the books, and we would want to see where we are at, reevaluate our situation, and proceed from there. The other again, so again, highlighting the recurring versus non-recurring, the $6.5 million, that is pulled with the idea of the property tax rate consideration, that a $6.5 million ask would allow property taxes to be at their current levels. Again, give or take individual situations for individual property owners, but that would not be a tax increase as a whole, that we'd be able to keep the total tax levy dollars that we levied this past fall, keep that amount constant. So we're not asking for a blank check from the community, we're asking for something we know that's not going to put additional burden on the taxpayers. The reason, moving to the next point then, for length, I believe there are 3 districts in the state that have gone to a 1-year operational referendum. Again, in the context of 424 districts in the state, I would not advise that we incur costs going back to referendum. We're spending time talking about referendum if we go every year. The general trend is for districts to go 3 to 5 years. The reason for 3 years is, again, thinking about local control and flexibility, that we want to see where we're at in 3 years. If we go out for 5 years and our enrollment projections dramatically shift, we're locked into that, and that can create some future issues that we're saying 3 years, we want to reassess where we're at and then make the best decision going forward afterwards. So the 3 years provides us with the resources we so desperately need, but allows us to be flexible and nimble to continue to meet the needs of all students going forward. And then to remind the board, the official ballot language will be presented at the January board meeting and up for a vote so that we can continue if that's the direction we decide to move in. A lot of information there, so I'm happy to entertain questions, comments, concerns at this time.
One of the other features with a 3-year duration is that it allows us to get through another biennial budget. So it allows us to see what is it that the state might do or not do in their next budget. In some regards, this cycle actually benefits our taxpayers, I think, in that they can see through another budget cycle what's going to happen in Madison and whether, what the financial situation, not just for our district, but all public school districts might be moving forward as well. So that 3 year is really critical that way. It gives us, it's right in the middle of that duration.
So the video was good, very lengthy, but it was really good. I mean, it was almost like it could have been made for our district. And so we're saying that this is statewide, but focusing just on Fort. With seeing the percentage, I mean, the percentage of what it costs to run the district keeps going up. And the amount that the state aid, now how much did we get in ESSER funds?
We received, I know for ESSER 3, which is the largest of the three, we received about just over $2 million for that one, but we've used that over a number of years. I want to say ESSER 1 and 2 combined were another $1.5 million, $2 million, give or take.
So let's say 3.5 million. And the expectation was that was used for pandemic relief. It was used for technology to get kids still learning and the teachers set up to learn. It was is training for teachers to be able to do that. But, and then academic, getting back into academics, mental health support, behavioral support, all of that. But then the state said, but you got this chunk of money, 3.5 million, but we're not increasing anything.
Exactly.
Correct.
So in essence, some of it was probably used for operational costs to keep getting us through, plus living in this virtual world. And then a hybrid world with some kids virtual, some kids still in the classroom, and all the other maintenance things that had to happen at the schools to keep everyone safe. So,
Yep.
I know I'm making statements. I
Yep.
just think that it's important to acknowledge these things, that it's like not getting a raise for 20 years, but your mortgage goes up, your groceries go up, your utilities go up, but you're expected to keep living at that same level, but without getting a raise.
I think the most powerful chart in all of this, and we've shared it with you and the public multiple times before, is the chart which shows that had the cap been allowed to follow the inflationary percentage increase, that gap is staggering, and so for people who really beg the question of why, it's that. Our buying power, or our ability to purchase the goods and services and provide maintenance and facilities and other things, have not been allowed to keep with standard inflation. That difference is why we're here again tonight, talking about the necessity of an operational referendum.
Yeah, I think we as a board have a heavy duty in front of us to try and decide how we're going to move this district forward when it comes to referendum. And as I'm watching the video and as I hear you speak here, like it's clear to me and I hope the public that we're trying to be very straightforward with whatever we're going to be communicating over here in the next month. And I appreciate your approach of simple and straightforward. Listen, we've heard what was maybe some frustrations or some unclear messages in the past, that we're trying to clear all that up. What I'm hearing at 6.5, the tax rate will remain the same as what it was this year, right? $6.5 million, we're still gonna be in a deficit, but we have to right-size staff, maintain our fiscal responsibility to the taxpayer base. And at 3 years, it feels like the right time, given some timing, and gives us doesn't lock us in for anything longer than what we won't need or will need, but gives us a pretty good idea where things will sit in 3 years. I'm assuming 3 years is a little bit easier to better understand where this district is going. 5 years, things get a little bit gray at that point here. So, yeah, I mean, board, we got a lot to do in the next month here. Try to figure this out, better understand how we're gonna move forward. So, I think the video was great. I think the presentation was clear. Now we just we have to come together and figure this out.
In January, are we approving going forward with the referendum
Yes.
and the language on the ballot?
Yes, so as required by statute, you need to take final action by a specific date in January. and your now rescheduled meeting does allow you to take care of that. So what we are looking for this evening is for your direction to continue in this path as Mr. Knitt has laid out for you this evening. And then we will bring to you in January the final resolutions required to put this on the ballot, and then for us to begin or continue rather informing the public of what will be on the ballot in April.
So in January, we're basically hitting the start button on sending this
That's
boulder
right.
down
So
the
this
hill.
evening, you're allowing us to continue in this vein, and then in January, you will take final action.
Well, we don't have any choice, we have to go forward. Do you want a motion, or you just want a general?
We do not require any action this evening,
Okay.
other than affirmation
Well,
of this path.
I affirm.
I would say, I agree with you that I think that asking a two-parted question of, let's add this much recurring, let's add this much non-recurring, it adds so much to the language, and I
It
think
did.
it causes a lot of confusion. What am I, what is this, a choose your own adventure? I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do here. And I do like the prudence of the non-recurring, because that allows us to reevaluate. Unfortunately, it also might put us in the same position 3 years from now, and the taxpayers keep going, why do these questions keep coming up? But it's because that's the way that the legislature is saying they want districts to operate their school districts, is by continuing to go back to the taxpayers and saying, let's go, community, do you want to do this? Do you not? What do you want for the school district? So I do agree, I think the simplification of the question, not having a compounded question, and then I think how we communicate. I mean, I think it's all really important. And I mean, you hear taxes are going up, inflation is causing everything to be increased. But as the video laid out, the idea is that the state's not collecting, the amount that they would be if they're giving this, but then the state is also sitting on billions of dollars, not distributing that either, so.
Well, and I think the board should, feel very good about the tax bills that went out this month related to the school district line. I mean, we made very significant by percentage cuts last spring, which I don't think anyone will forget anytime soon. And that is reflected in what this asks allows us to do, which is to create a 3-year non-recurring referendum that allows that to happen without a raise to the tax rate, and allows us to continue doing the good work that we're doing and continuing to see the improvements that we've been sharing with you in the community over the last couple of years.
Of the amount that we have on that property tax line, how much of that how much tax are we collecting for charter and
Voucher.
Oh,
For the voucher
voucher
program.
schools?
Vouchers.
Voucher schools?
voucher, yeah, that's right.
Yes, that I believe is right around $1.5 million this year, that we are collecting, and then that is being distributed to private school vouchers.
And that's not broken out at all?
It is not.
So this is gonna sound a little like naive, but there's always conversation of the question of like, is this the only way to fund the school district? We talk about how the government gives us so much money, we talk about the taxpayers, where else could we tap into that source? Because I think people misunderstand that we're not like a business that gives this product and we can raise this product, but I guess I'm just trying to give clarity as this is where we are, this is what we need to do in order for our schools to succeed and be, to do better as well.
There's one way to do that, and that is through increased student enrollment. So for us to continue being a district of choice, to continue to build program, to continue to demonstrate success and have secure buildings and have facilities that are adequate, and to have continuing evolving programming and things that kids and families want, to relocate and move to Fort Atkinson, or perhaps to choose us and come from other districts, that's the way that we are able to increase revenue, which is through enrollment. So when we talk about additional dual credit offerings at the high school, when we talk about the robust and successful program that we have going at the middle school, when we talk about the building improvements that we have going on in all 4 of our facilities in elementary schools for next year, related to safety, but also related to a more contemporary look and feel and experience for kids and families. Those are all investments that we, you, and the community have made in making not just our existing families and students feel that they're part of something special and part of something successful, but also in attempts to gather other families and students to join us as well. So I think your question is valid, and the answer is simple. It's through increased student enrollment.
And I think that, I mean, the district has also used, as probably other districts, creative ways. I mean, through grants, but I mean, you're nickel and diming. I mean,
Yeah.
you are getting pennies on the dollar in grant money and the amount of resource it takes to apply for grants. We've also done sponsorships. I mean, we have Jones Dairy Farm Stadium, we have
Absolutely.
Premier Bank Gymnasium, and I apologize that I'm not gonna go through all of them because I can't remember all of them. But I mean, we have done significant amount by reaching out to corporations, reaching out
Absolutely.
for money that's out there. But that takes a tremendous amount of resource for, you know, pennies on the dollar. And I don't mean to minimize
Oh,
those
absolute-
sponsorships or grants, but the amount that it takes, it just doesn't, it doesn't bridge that gap for learning.
Agreed.
So it is like we have a product, except we can't, we're at the mercy of someone else placing the price on that product, and that was placed in 1993 and has not kept up with inflation. So we have to create the product for what someone else tells us to, at $1993.
And our product is improving, that's for sure. And I think, you know, we're responding to what the community said last year, which was, you know, simplify and help us see exactly what the need is and exactly how it is that, you know, we can help better understand what it is and how we can go about with that assistance. And I think, you know, the track that we have before you is the most simple question, the most simple, clear approach that we're legally able to provide you and the electors to help us work through the next state budget and to get us into the next 3 years. We would love nothing more than 100+% of our focus to be on improving the teaching and learning and the success of our district than the referendum machine that we've been in over the last couple of years.
Well, and I think it's easy to point out, you know, we dropped our tax rate considerably, and, you know, we can't continue to drop and drop and drop. At some point, we're gonna have diminishing, as it mentioned in the video, we're gonna have diminishing returns on what's going on here, right?
Absolutely.
So we, you know, by assuming that we're gonna have another 10% cut, because that was fun this year, that can't continue to happen. This referendum is gonna be important. And to think that, you know, we have all these things that we can cut, like, guess what, folks, like, at some point, the diminishing returns will happen. There's only so much we can cut without the cost of, and the quality of the education diminishing.
There's flesh and there's bone.
Yep.
And, you know, it is as hard and distasteful as the work that we did together last spring was. I think we were very pertinent and very strategic in how it is that we made those reductions tied to enrollment so that we could continue on the trajectory of improving teaching and learning and success. And we're seeing that this year. That is flesh and bone. At some point, we can no longer go that deep again and make believe that we're going to be able to continue on the path that we are.
I mean, unfortunately, we have to go to referendum. We've been saying this for, you know, quite a while now, unfortunately, but, I mean, we have to, and especially when our budget is, what is it, like 80% of our budget is staff. It's people. You know, we didn't pass the last one, that's what we have to cut. That is what we have been cutting, and that's what if we don't pass this, it's gonna happen again. This time it's probably gonna be a lot more. It's not gonna be easy, it's not gonna be fun, but if we don't get our legislation to give us the proper amount of money that all districts need, to produce really well-educated and well-rounded people, this is what we have to do. The community has to step up, and we've tried, but they're just gonna have to step up and help us produce these wonderful people that we know we have. And to do that, we have to go to referendum, and we have to get it passed.
Yeah, so obviously I think we're all saying move forward.
Yes.
And come January, we'll see where the cards lay and we'll make a decision then. So thank you for your presentation this evening.
Good job.
Alrighty, we'll be moving on to item E, school board election information. Mr. Rogers.
An election for the school board will be held on Tuesday, April 2nd, 2024. The spring election will be for one seat on the school board for a 3-year term. Incumbent currently holding the seat is Rona Bukta. Anyone interested in running for the seat should contact the district superintendent and Board of Education Administrative Assistant Lisa Haas in the Luther Administration Center at 201 Park Street, or by phone at 920-563-7807, or visit the school district website at www.fortschools.org for information. Those interested will be given election materials, including an election schedule, a WASB guide for candidates, and necessary forms. All the information and forms are also available on our school district's website. The deadline for filing the ballot access documents, including the declaration of candidacy form and the campaign finance registration statement, is 5 p.m. on Tuesday, January 2nd, 2024. School offices will be closed for holidays on December 25th, December 26th, December 29th, 2023, and January 1st, 2024. If more than 2 candidates filed for the one seat, a primary election will be held on Tuesday, February 20th, 2024. The elected board member will take office on Monday, April 22nd, 2024.
Thank you for that. All right, and moving on to items for future board meetings.
Yes, among other topics, you will have a nutrition services report, district audit report, approval of 4K service contracts, mid-year compensation adjustments, open enrollment application alert and available space, as well as, again, additional school board election information.
All righty, thank you for that. Moving on to the last item this evening.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. Selly, a second by Mr. Rogers. All those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? All righty, we conclude at 6:47 this evening.